You know what's strange? The person who loves you, the one who still thinks about you more than you realize, talked about you today. Not in some dramatic movie scene, not with tears running down their face. It was quieter than that, almost dangerous in how quiet it was. Your name came up naturally, in the middle of an ordinary conversation, maybe over coffee, maybe while pretending to talk about something else. And for a second, their voice changed. That tiny shift people make when they're trying not to reveal too much. And if you could have heard what they said, I honestly think it would have stayed in your head for weeks. Because it wasn't just about missing you, it was about who you've become. And deep down, I think you already feel that something about you has changed lately, even if nobody's said it out loud yet. So before we go any further, do something small for me. If this already feels uncomfortably personal, if part of you feels seen in a way you weren't expecting, subscribe. Not because it helps the channel, because I think there are conversations you've avoided for a long time, and something tells me you're finally ready to hear them. There's a certain kind of loneliness men experience that almost nobody talks about correctly. Not the loud loneliness, the invisible kind. The kind where you still answer texts, still go to work, still joke around, still function. But internally, you feel strangely absent from your own life, and people around you notice it before you do. That's the part men underestimate. Women especially notice emotional disappearance long before words ever explain it. You think she stopped talking because she lost interest? No. Sometimes she stopped because she realized you had already emotionally left the room weeks earlier. You were there physically, but mentally somewhere else. Distracted, exhausted, guarded, half alive. And the terrifying thing is, most men don't even notice when it starts happening. It usually begins after disappointment. Not one dramatic heartbreak, smaller things. A betrayal you never processed. A rejection you laughed off publicly but replayed privately. The pressure of always having to be fine. The exhaustion of feeling needed but not understood. So you adapt. You become calmer, less expressive, less hopeful. You call it maturity. Other people call it distance. And today, when your name came up, the person who loves you said something that hit harder than you'd expect. They said, "He acts like he doesn't need anyone anymore." That sentence sounds harmless until you sit with it. Because maybe you've worked very hard to create exactly that impression. Maybe you thought being unbothered would protect you. A lot of men do this without realizing the cost. You slowly stop reaching, stop explaining yourself, stop asking for reassurance, stop admitting when something hurts. And at first it feels powerful. Then one day you wake up and realize nobody knows how to reach you anymore. Not because they didn't care, because you trained everyone to believe you wanted silence. And the heartbreaking part? The person who talked about you today, they weren't angry. That's what would almost be easier. No, their voice carried something much heavier than anger. Sadness. Like they were remembering the version of you that used to let himself be emotionally visible before life convinced him that vulnerability was unsafe. And I need you to hear this carefully. People don't miss perfection. They miss presence. They miss warmth, eye contact, small honesty. The way you used to react before you started filtering every emotion through pride and self-protection. Because despite what the internet tells men constantly, emotional control and emotional numbness are not the same thing. And somewhere along the line, you may have confused them. I want to tell you something uncomfortable. The people who love you can feel when you're trying to disappear without physically leaving. And men do this more often than they admit. Not because they're cold, usually because they're overwhelmed. See, women are taught to speak emotion early, men are taught to manage perception. That creates this strange split where a man can be suffering deeply while still looking completely functional from the outside. He'll still show up, still reply with, "I'm good," still make plans, still smile at the right moments. But internally, he's gone quiet in places nobody can see. And the person who mentioned you today, they notice that quiet. Not all at once, slowly, in the delayed replies, the shorter eye contact, the way you stopped talking about the future with excitement, the way compliments started bouncing off you instead of landing. That last one matters more than you think. When someone loves you, they watch how you receive care. A man who secretly feels unworthy reacts strangely to affection. He downplays it, deflects it, turns it into humor, changes the subject, and after a while, the person loving him starts feeling helpless because nothing reaches him anymore. Maybe you think nobody notices the difference between the real you and the armored version of you. They do, especially the people emotionally attached to you. There's a specific sadness that happens when someone realizes they can still touch your body, but not your inner world. That's the part nobody prepares men for. You can become emotionally unavailable while still desperately wanting connection. And honestly, that contradiction destroys a lot of relationships quietly. Not through screaming, not through cheating, not through some dramatic ending, just through emotional starvation that nobody names directly. The person who talked about you today said something else, something softer. They said, "I don't think he knows how hard he's become on himself." And that sentence stayed with me, because I think a lot of men listening right now have no idea how violent their inner dialogue has become. You judge yourself constantly for being behind, for not earning enough yet, for caring too much, for caring too little, for not being chosen enough, for aging, for failing, for wanting comfort when you think you should only want success. You hold yourself to impossible emotional standards and then wonder why you feel exhausted around people who genuinely care about you. Because care becomes difficult to receive when your identity is built around self-criticism. So when someone says, "I'm proud of you," part of you distrusts it immediately. You think, if they knew everything happening in my head, they wouldn't say that. That thought right there? That thought changes the way you love. It changes the way you let yourself be loved too. You become hyper-aware of rejection. You overanalyze tone shifts. You pretend not to care when someone pulls away, but internally it wrecks your nervous system for days. And nobody sees it because you learned composure instead of honesty. But composure has a dark side. Sometimes it becomes emotional isolation wearing a mature face. And the frightening thing is, people start respecting your independence while completely missing your loneliness. You become the strong one, the reliable one, the calm one, the emotionally controlled one. Meanwhile, at night, your mind won't stop replaying conversations that looked completely normal to everyone else. That's why what the person said about you today matters. Because they weren't criticizing your strength, they were grieving your softness. The softness you slowly buried because life taught you that being emotionally open was dangerous, unattractive, or weak. But here's the truth nobody says clearly enough. The right people never needed you to be emotionless. They needed you to be real. And those are very different things. There's something else they said about you today. And this is the part I think you felt coming before I even said it. They said, "He disappears when he's hurting." Not physically, emotionally. And maybe your first instinct is to defend yourself, to say, "No, I just need space," or "I don't want to burden people." Or the classic one men say when they've been emotionally cornered too many times in life, "I handle things on my own." But handling things on your own and abandoning yourself emotionally are not the same thing. A lot of men learned very early that vulnerability changes how people treat them. Sometimes it was subtle. You opened up once and someone used it against you later. You admitted fear and saw disappointment in somebody's eyes. You needed comfort and got advice instead. You expressed pain and immediately felt ashamed for having needs at all. So eventually you adapted. You stopped bringing your full emotional reality into relationships, not because you stopped feeling, because you stopped feeling safe. And the strange part is, the people who care about you can often sense this before you consciously realize you're doing it. They notice the emotional retreat. They notice how quickly you switch into logic when conversations become too personal. How you joke at the exact moment something honest almost comes out. How you suddenly become busy when life hurts too much internally. You call it protecting your peace, but sometimes it's protection from intimacy itself. And intimacy is terrifying for people who secretly believe they're difficult to love once fully known. That belief hides in men more than people realize, especially competent men, especially calm men. especially men everyone assumes are emotionally strong. Because nobody checks on the man who appears composed. They admire him, depend on him, expect him to stay steady. And after years of that, he starts feeling guilty for having emotional needs at all. So he develops this quiet survival habit. Feel everything privately. Reveal almost nothing publicly. And for a while it works, until someone genuinely loves him. That's when the system starts breaking, because real love requires emotional visibility. Not perfection, visibility. And that's terrifying when you've spent years building your identity around being unreadable. The person who talked about you today, I don't think they were asking for grand emotional speeches from you. Honestly, most women aren't. They're usually looking for smaller signs, presence, consistency, emotional honesty in simple moments, not performance. But men often misunderstand this and think vulnerability means collapsing completely or losing composure. No, sometimes vulnerability sounds like, "I've been distant lately. I don't really know what's wrong with me. That affected me more than I expected." That's it. Tiny moments of truth create emotional closeness far more than polished perfection ever will. But somewhere along the way, you may have started believing your value depended on always appearing unaffected. And I need you to notice what that belief is costing you. Because the person who loves you, they don't feel closer to you when you act invincible. They feel locked out. And eventually, people stop knocking on doors that never open. That's the tragedy. Not that men don't feel deeply, it's that many of them feel deeply in complete isolation. And isolation changes people slowly. You become more cynical, more emotionally cautious, more suspicious of warmth, less expressive, less trusting. Until one day someone says, "I miss the old you." And you secretly realize you do too. That realization hurts in a very specific way, because now you have to confront the possibility that survival changed your personality more than you intended. And maybe that's why hearing that someone talked about you today unsettles you so much. Not because you're curious what they said, because part of you already knows they saw through the version of you you've been trying very hard to maintain. You know what nobody tells men when they become emotionally guarded? Eventually, it stops feeling like protection. It starts feeling like hunger. Not dramatic hunger, not desperation, something quieter. You start craving conversations that actually reach you. Moments where you don't have to monitor yourself constantly. People who make your nervous system feel calm instead of evaluated. And when you finally meet someone who sees through you a little, it almost scares you more than rejection ever did. Because now there's risk again. Now there's someone close enough to notice when your voice changes, when your energy drops, when your eyes look tired even while you're smiling. That level of emotional visibility can feel terrifying for men who built their entire adult identity around self-containment. And I think the person who talked about you today understands that about you more than you realize. They notice the contradiction, how badly you want connection, while resisting the very things that create it. That contradiction shows up everywhere. You want reassurance, but pull away when someone gets too close. You want loyalty, but struggle to believe it's real when you receive it. You want peace, but your mind keeps preparing for disappointment even in calm moments. That's what unresolved emotional pain does. It trains your body to expect loss before love has fully arrived. So instead of relaxing into relationships, you monitor them. You study small changes in tone, response times, energy shifts. You become emotionally alert all the time. And outwardly, people call you observant. Internally, you're exhausted. Because hypervigilance feels intelligent at first, until you realize you haven't fully relaxed around another human being in years. That line usually hits men harder than they expect, because many of them genuinely cannot remember the last time they felt emotionally safe enough to stop performing strength. And performance is exhausting, even masculine performance, especially masculine performance. The constant pressure to appear stable, certain, unaffected, in control. Do you know how many men silently panic when they feel emotionally attached to someone? Not because attachment is weak, because attachment creates emotional exposure. Now someone can hurt you. Now someone's absence matters. Now your emotional state is connected to another person's consistency. And if you've been disappointed enough in life, that dependence feels dangerous. So you try to stay emotionally balanced by becoming less emotionally available. But there's a problem with that strategy. You also reduce your ability to feel closeness. You can't selectively numb vulnerability. It numbs connection too. That's why some men slowly wake up one day feeling emotionally flat. Nothing excites them deeply anymore. Compliments barely land. Affection feels distant. Even success feels strangely temporary. Because emotional suppression doesn't only bury pain, it dulls joy too. The person who mentioned you today, I think they sensed that exhaustion in you, and what they said next was almost painfully honest. They said, "He acts like he's okay because he doesn't want anyone worrying about him." That sentence carries so much hidden loneliness because on the surface it sounds considerate, but underneath it, there's a man who learned that his struggles should stay private. A man who thinks being emotionally low maintenance makes him easier to love. And maybe part of you still believes that. Maybe you think needing reassurance makes you weak. Maybe you think asking for emotional closeness makes you less masculine. Maybe you think carrying everything silently is strength. But silence has side effects. It creates distance where intimacy could have existed. And the painful irony? The people who truly care about you usually don't feel burdened by your honesty. They feel relieved by it. Relieved that you finally let them see you instead of managing their perception of you all the time. Because being loved while emotionally hidden never feels fully believable. Some part of you always wonders, if they saw the real weight I carry, would they still stay? And maybe that question has shaped more of your life than you've admitted yet. There's a moment that happens in a lot of men's lives that almost nobody notices from the outside. It's not loud, no dramatic breakdown, no obvious collapse. It's the moment he quietly decides, I'll stop expecting people to understand me. And after that decision, something changes. He still loves people, still shows up, still plays his role in everyone's life. But internally, he becomes emotionally self-contained in a way that's hard to reverse. That's why some men can sit beside someone they care about deeply and still feel profoundly alone. Because physical closeness and emotional safety are not the same thing. And if I'm honest, I think the person who talked about you today feels that distance from you. Not because you don't care, because caring stopped feeling safe to express naturally. You started editing yourself too much, monitoring your reactions, hiding disappointment, acting unaffected when things actually hurt. And over time, that creates a strange emotional loneliness where people know your personality, but not your inner world. There's a difference, a huge difference. People might know your habits, your humor, your routines, your preferences, but very few know what genuinely keeps you awake at night. Very few know what your mind sounds like when you're exhausted. And some men become so emotionally private that even love starts feeling performative. They say the right things, do the right things, play the role well. But internally, there's still a wall up, because deep down, they're terrified of being emotionally dependent on anyone. That fear usually comes from somewhere real: disappointment, abandonment, humiliation, emotional neglect, being loved inconsistently. Experiences like that teach men dangerous lessons. Lessons like, don't need too much, don't trust calm moments, don't become emotionally reachable. So eventually, he develops this survival identity where he prides himself on needing very little from other people. But humans aren't built that way. Even strong men need softness somewhere. Even disciplined men need emotional rest. Even independent men want to feel chosen without having to constantly earn it. That last part matters more than you think. A lot of men secretly feel like love is conditional on performance, on success, on composure, on usefulness, on stability. So when they struggle emotionally, they isolate themselves automatically because they fear becoming less desirable once their imperfections become visible. And honestly, that fear breaks my heart a little, because many men have no idea how lovable they actually are beneath the performance. The person who mentioned you today sees pieces of that hidden version of you, the tired version, the guarded version, The version that pretends not to need reassurance while quietly craving emotional certainty. And they said something that would probably stay in your chest for a long time if you heard it directly. They said, "I wish he understood he doesn't always have to carry everything alone." Sit with that for a second, not because it sounds emotional, because of what it reveals. It reveals that somebody notices your weight even when you don't speak about it. That somebody sees the effort behind your composure, the exhaustion behind your calmness. And maybe that's what unsettles you most about this entire conversation. Not the idea that someone loves you, the idea that someone sees through you. Because being seen is risky when you've spent years mastering emotional concealment. But it's also the thing you've been starving for. Not attention, not validation, understanding. Real understanding. The kind where you don't have to translate your pain into something socially acceptable before sharing it. The kind where silence isn't mistaken for strength every single time. And maybe, just maybe, part of your healing begins the moment you stop treating your emotional needs like weaknesses that must stay hidden from everyone who cares about you. I think the hardest truth for many men to accept is this. You can spend years becoming impressive and still feel emotionally unseen. You can build discipline, control your reactions, achieve things people respect, and yet at the end of the day, there's still this quiet ache sitting underneath everything. The ache of wondering whether anyone actually knows you beyond the role you play. That ache changes people. It makes some men colder, others become emotionally distant without intending to. Some bury themselves in work. Some chase distractions constantly because silence forces them to confront what they feel. And some men become so used to emotional isolation that intimacy itself starts feeling unfamiliar. Not unwanted, just unfamiliar. That's why when someone genuinely cares about you, part of you relaxes, while another part becomes suspicious at the exact same time. You wonder, how long until this changes? What happens if they see the parts of me I hide? What if I become emotionally invested and lose them? Those thoughts don't come from weakness. They come from memory. Your nervous system remembers disappointment even when your mouth says, "I'm fine." And the person who talked about you today? I don't think they were asking you to become someone completely different. I think they missed the version of you that wasn't so afraid to be emotionally present. The version of you that laughed more freely, opened up more naturally, didn't carry every feeling alone like it was some private responsibility. Because somewhere along the way, you started believing that silence was maturity. But mature men still need connection. They still need reassurance sometimes, still need warmth, still need people who make life feel emotionally lighter instead of emotionally strategic. There's nothing weak about that. And honestly, I think many men are exhausted from pretending otherwise, exhausted from acting like loneliness doesn't affect them, like heartbreak didn't change them, like rejection didn't harden them, like pressure isn't slowly wearing them down internally. You can only suppress yourself for so long before your body starts feeling emotionally disconnected from your own life. That numbness men describe sometimes. It's often unresolved exhaustion, the result of carrying too much internally for too long without emotional release. And I need you to understand something carefully. The answer was never becoming emotionless. It was becoming emotionally honest without losing yourself. That's different, very different. Because emotional honesty doesn't mean collapsing every time life hurts. It means you stop treating your inner world like something shameful. You stop punishing yourself for being human. The person who loves you talked about you today because you matter to them emotionally. Not because you're perfect. Not because you always say the right thing. Not because you've completely figured yourself out. Because despite all the walls you've built, there's still something deeply sincere about you that people can feel. Even now. Especially now. And maybe the reason this conversation hit you so personally isn't because you're thinking about one specific person. Maybe it's because, for the first time in a long time, you stopped and recognized yourself. Not the version you perform socially, not the composed version, not the emotionally guarded version. The real version, the tired version, the hopeful version, the version that still wants connection despite everything life has taught him. And if that part of you is still alive, then you're not nearly as lost as you think you are. You're just exhausted from carrying your heart like it's something dangerous instead of something human. And maybe tonight, after everyone else is asleep, that's the truth you finally stop running from.